So this will be the third ETL in-depth tutorial video. So today we'll be covering the E portion of ETL, which is data extraction. To do data extraction, we need to have a sample data. So I've gone ahead and looked into Weekly Infectious Disease Bulletin provided by data.gov.sg. And the first example we're going to cover is how do you read data that has been imported into MongoDB, as this will likely be the most common form that you will apply when doing your local development. So to start off, let's just click download. Okay. And you will then press save to save the zip file. Now you will need to unzip the file and then import it into Ambience. So use the import module. And as before, just drop this extracted CSV into the box over here. Press upload. Next. Okay, then we'll give this a collection name. Okay, and press next. So we'll go ahead to then read it into the ETL module. So first we need to create a chain set. We'll call this ETL exercises. Okay, so create your first chain called read from MongoDB. And then you will notice that your chain is blank because this is a new chain in a new chain set. So to read from MongoDB, we just need two steps. The first one will be MongoDB definition, and the second will be MongoDB reader. So we'll add both steps at the same time to save time. So in this case, of course, we'll just choose eno and the collection that we just created. So MongoDB definition merely defines what to read from. Right, MongoDB Reader is the one that actually does the reading. It's successful. You see that I have 18,000 records over here in the 3 columns with the metadata column generated automatically by Ambience itself. If you want, you can actually discard this using the discard field step. Okay, so next thing we're going to cover is reading from an API. So depending on your data source, you might be able to get an API version. So it saves you the trouble of having to download the files and later on having to extract it from the zip file, and then doing this on a weekly basis, right? Because using batch file formats like CSV is a lot more manual, and you have to constantly update the data yourself. So instead, we'll use data APIs if you want fresh data. So clicking on your data API button over here, you'll be able to see a query example. So we just want to copy this link here, okay, and then we'll paste it here in your URL box in order to see an example of your API. So we can tell there's a few fields and there's an array in there, and the data format is actually JSON. This proves that it works. So now what we want to do is we're going to create a new chain set. We will call this exercise 1, so EX1 read API. Okay, and then we'll need this step called URL reader. Okay, because we are reading data provided from a URL. The next one we need is a JSON reader. Okay, so I'll explain in a moment. So the first thing we want to do is we want to paste the URL that we've copied from the API directly into this URL box. Okay, when you run to this particular step, it will tell you the number of bytes received and the MIME type. Having more than 0 bytes tells you that the reading is successful. Next thing you want to do is tell the software Ambience that the incoming bytes should be interpreted as a JSON format. So that's why we added in the JSON reader over here. So if you run to the step now, you'll see that it gets interpreted correctly and bytes gets read as a JSON, which gives you these 3 fields with the results and your records. Okay, so what we want to do next is to look into the area of our interest, which is under results and records, because over here you will then see that for each week what is the disease type and the number of cases resulting from the disease. So this is the end state that we want to reach. In order to replicate what we saw in the CSV file format, which is like so, in a tabular form, we need to perform some transformation operations. So the first thing we want to do is to expand this result field over here. It's similar to how we are clicking it to expand. We're going to use the tool to do that. So the step for this is called flatten subdocument. So once you added in flatten subdocument, press close, and the field that we want to flatten is called result, because the object is under the field result. So if we run to the step now, you'll see that result has now been expanded. Okay, and then we have the records at the top level now. So the next one we want to do is apply the same concept to records, because that's where the interesting bits of information are hidden. So the one thing to take note here is records actually tell you that it's an array. So while the steps look similar, we need to add in an extra step here, which is called array unwind, followed by flatten subdocument. Okay, and the field to process on is called records, because that's the one over here. Okay, now run them one by one to show you the result. So if I just run to array unwind, you will notice that from one row we now have five rows. I'm deliberately avoiding the word records because your field is called records. So we have 5 rows now as a result of unwinding the array that has 5 rows nested in there. So from one row we unwound it becomes 5. And now next thing we want to do is to bring this epi week, disease and number of cases to the highest level. So that's why we use flatten subdocument. Okay, and yeah, it's working on the field called records. Now if I press run to step, it will be shown on the right side. So we have now epi week, disease and number of cases. So now we have a similar structure with the access fields. Now if you want to mimic almost exactly what we saw in the CSV when we read it in, we can use retain fields, okay, which is the sister step of discard fields. So retain fields only retain the fields that you have specifically defined. Like so. Now you'll notice that the API only has 5 records. Now this is because the example API sets a limit for 5, but we can go ahead and put in a very large number. So I saw previously that the total records provided by the API is actually 16,000. So if we just change the limit to exceed that, let's say 25,000, it will give us all the records, and you will notice that the processing speed is actually very, very fast. So just like this, we have all 16,000 records that have been read. So this mimics almost exactly how the CSV looks. So that's all for the tutorial on simple data extraction. On the next series of videos, we'll cover some transformation and data categorization.